What kind of man lets his neighbor steal from him every day? She sneered. Karen didn't know I was listening. She said it to her little lapdog while plugging into the outlet behind my cabin like it belonged to her. Not a glance, not a knock, just a casual flick of the wrist and that same smug look, like I should be thanking her. But the thing she didn't understand, the thing people like her never understand, is that some wires carry more than just power. Some carry the weight of systems, consequences, and sewage. Every morning, like clockwork, she stole electricity from my outlet. What she didn't know, that outlet was wired directly to the underground sewage pump that kept our entire HOA from flooding in crap, literally, and she was about to trigger a chain reaction no HOA meeting could clean up. Have you ever had a neighbor cross the line, then blame you for the mess they made? Share your story in the comments, and hit subscribe if you're tired of HOA bullies finally getting what they deserve. The first sign was the smell. At first, I thought maybe something had died out by the trees. Then I blamed the lake. Then a dead squirrel behind the HVAC unit. But the real problem? It was underground. You don't notice septic issues until they're already on the rise. Literally. And when your property sits on a slow drain system designed to prevent backups in a lakeside community, you wire your pump directly. Not through the grid. Not through chance. Direct, reliable, regulated, unless someone's stealing from it. Karen's daily power siphoning wasn't just petty theft. It was tampering with a closed-cycle power loop that operated a delicate balance beneath 5 homes, including her own. But of course she didn't care about balance. She cared about her dog dryer running uninterrupted. She cared about free power. She cared about control. And worst of all, she thought she was untouchable. This is not just a plug, let me be clear. This wasn't an accident. She didn't borrow the outlet once in an emergency. She made it a ritual. Every weekday at 11:03 a.m., I watched the security cam footage. She walked over from her yard, Crocs on, sunglasses up, and jammed her extension cord into the same exterior socket, not on her property, on mine. And I wouldn't have known at all if I hadn't installed that camera 2 summers ago after raccoons got into the compost bin. At first, I thought, let it go. Maybe it's temporary. But then I checked the wiring logs, smart meter, readouts showing drops in current to the septic unit. And that's when I realized she wasn't just mooching off me. She was risking a biohazard. Karen had been elected to the HOA board during what I like to call the gated community renaissance. She dressed like a real estate agent on a sales call and acted like she ran a military base. Mailboxes had to be black, no exceptions, no wind chimes, no vegetable gardens in the front yard, and God forbid your grass was taller than regulation, height by even half an inch. She fined a teenager for skateboarding on the shared sidewalk, told an elderly couple they couldn't fly a family flag without permission, and once threatened to tow a nurse's car for facing the wrong direction in the driveway. She wielded her HOA authority like a weapon, and the worst part? People let her because they were scared, or tired, or just trying to get through the day. But me? I've lived through bigger storms than Karen, and I don't flinch. The system she never saw, let me tell you about the pump. Most homes around here run on septic. But because of the slope near the lake and high water table, our pump has to push, waste up a slight incline before draining into the field. That system is powered directly through a sub-panel near my cabin, designed to avoid overloading the main grid during storms. Redundancy, reliability, regulation, until someone plugs in. An industrial-grade pet dryer at the same outlet. Every time Karen plugged in, my circuit surged. And every surge delayed the float switch in the septic system. That meant backups, overflow, pressure in the wrong places, and the smell. I waited. I watched. I documented. Karen didn't know I was recording every single theft. She didn't. No, I had time-stamped footage, showing her crossing the property line, plugging in, and walking away like she was watering her own plants. She didn't know I'd already checked the county plat map, confirming the outlet was on my land, not shared property. But most of all, she didn't know that the county's Department of Environmental Health is very interested in preventable septic system failures. All I had to do was wait. The day she noticed me, it was a Wednesday when Karen finally saw me standing on my deck, mug in hand, just watching. She froze mid-plug. "Can I help you?" she snapped. "Nope," I said calmly. She stared for a moment, blinking. Then turned around and yanked the cord out like I'd somehow violated her space. That was the last time she tried plugging in while I was watching, but not the last time she did it. So I kept the camera rolling. And I kept sending reports, quietly, legally, strategically. The community starts to sniff. Then the real problem began. Neighbors started complaining in the group thread about slow drainage. One guy on Cedar Lane said his toilet bubbled every time the washing machine ran. Another said he couldn't take a full shower without water rising around his ankles. Karen, in classic fashion, blamed residents misusing their systems. She demanded a vote on installing grease traps. She even accused one family of flushing diapers. What she never imagined? That the fault traced back to her. Her little orange extension cord had become a fuse in a quiet war she didn't even know she was losing. The quiet moment that changed everything that evening, I sat on my porch as the sky turned gold. I heard her dog barking. He always barked when she blow-dried him. The power surged again. I felt it. Just a flicker of light from the pump housing. A delay in the hum. I smiled. Not because I was cruel, but because I knew that some people only understand consequences when they see them, smell them, or step in them. And Karen? She was standing on the edge of something she couldn't control. Karen thought it was over. She avoided eye contact for a few days, didn't plug into the outlet when I was on the porch, even smiled and waved once like nothing had happened. But that smile cracked the moment a white truck rolled down our street, with a county seal on the door and a clipboard in the passenger seat. She was out by her roses, pruning with purpose, but the second she spotted that truck, the clippers dropped just a little slower. She straightened her spine too fast. Watched. The man stepped out, boots crunching gravel, clipboard under arm, work gloves in his back pocket. He didn't walk up her driveway. He walked to mine. Karen stood like a statue. I met him at the edge of my porch. "Mr. Kessler?" he asked. I nodded. "You filed the report about the shared drain field fluctuation?" That's the thing about septic infrastructure. It doesn't care about who runs the HOA or who thinks they're in charge. It cares about flow, gravity, and electricity. Disrupt the system, and it reports itself in backup, in smell, in legal liability. Karen came walking up just as the inspector was reviewing the meter I'd set up near the pump housing. She had her friendly voice on. "Oh, hi. Are you here about the drainage issue on Cedar Lane? I'm actually head of the HOA. I've been coordinating a response plan." The inspector didn't even look at her. "Ma'am, this is a private property. Inspection initiated by the landowner." Her eyes shifted. "Well, of course, but we've all been affected. And if there's something wrong with the pump, I just think—" He cut her off without flinching. "The problem isn't the pump. The problem is fluctuating voltage and delayed float switch activation. There's evidence someone's been drawing unauthorized current from a dedicated circuit." Karen's face twitched. I think you may be confused. That's a shared community outlet." I stepped down off the porch, calm. "It's not. The plat shows the property line. That outlet is 6 feet inside it. It's directly hardwired to the pump system. It's not for casual use." Karen laughed. It was a dry, rehearsed kind of laugh. "Well, this is the first I'm hearing of that. No one's ever told me not to use it." The inspector finally looked at her. "No one's required to. It's not your outlet." That shut her up for a second, but only a second. "What about the rest of the neighborhood? If you're saying the whole septic system is compromised, then doesn't that put everyone at risk? Shouldn't we be dealing with this as a board? The man glanced at me. I'll file a report with the county. If the issue persists, we'll have to involve environmental health. Backflow incidents, especially near a lake, are a Class B hazard. Karen looked like she'd just tasted vinegar. She tried to salvage it. Maybe it was just an accident. Maybe someone else plugged in. I met her eyes. You should be careful about making claims like that. I have 12 days of security footage, time-stamped, with audio. The color drained from her cheeks. She turned, muttering something about needing to check on her dog, the same one she'd been blow-drying every day at 11:03 a.m. The inspector and I walked the line back to the panel. He asked a few more questions, looked at the grounding system, confirmed the readings. He told me I'd done the right thing by reporting it early. I'll be filing a formal incident report, he said. She'll get a copy. I thanked him, not because I needed to, but because every small act of documentation mattered. Every line in the report, every timestamp, every volt out of place. It all built a wall she couldn't climb with her HOA badge. 3 days passed, then 5. No more plugging in, no more pretending, but the neighborhood had started whispering. Word had spread that an inspection happened. No one knew why. Karen kept quiet, but you could feel it in the way people paused near the mailboxes, lingered by their fences, and then the real storm broke. It started with a letter. Not from me, not from the county, from a neighbor. Dear Board, it read, I've recently experienced backflow into my downstairs tub and was informed there may be systemic issues with the shared septic line. Can the HOA confirm that all drainage infrastructure has been properly maintained and that no unauthorized modifications or overloads have taken place? Karen tried to control the narrative. She issued a community-wide email about unconfirmed concerns and temporary drain disruptions. She assured everyone the board was actively investigating possible solutions. But one of our neighbors, Mrs. Calder, retired, quiet, widowed, had had enough. She replied to the thread, would this have anything to do with the orange extension cord I've seen running from the Kessler property to Karen's yard every morning for the last month? The silence after that email was a new kind of loud. Karen never replied, but others did. 3 separate residents confirmed seeing the same thing. One posted a phone pic from their upstairs window, time-stamped. A clear shot of Karen's orange cord dangling from my outlet, wrapped around a tree stump, then leading to her porch. She couldn't explain that away, so she pivoted. She claimed temporary permissions were granted for emergency use. She said it had been approved in a verbal discussion with the property owner. She lied, and I let her. Because the next morning I submitted the footage, all 12 days of it, to the Environmental Health Department, attached to a notarized affidavit confirming no such permission was ever given. Karen received her first violation notice the following week. It was for tampering with essential infrastructure tied to regulated waste systems. She tried to downplay it, called it a misunderstanding. But county records don't play politics. She was fined and warned. Any further interference would be considered a public health violation. Escalated enforcement would follow, but Karen didn't back down. People like her don't know how. Instead, she summoned the HOA board for an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, I wasn't a board member, but 3 of my neighbors were, and after that meeting, they weren't quiet anymore. Turns out Karen tried to flip the script. She proposed new rules banning exterior-mounted power sources on residential properties. She argued that unauthorized cords and access points created liability for the community and demanded new regulations requiring anyone with an external outlet to install HOA-controlled locks on them. That's when my neighbor, Mark, ex-firefighter, lives down the hill, stood up and asked, "You want us to give you keys to our power?" Karen tried to spin it as a safety initiative. But the board wasn't buying it. Not after the footage, not after the fines, and not after what happened that Thursday. Rain had hit the night before. Heavy, slow, the kind that fills the ground with weight. Karen, ever proud, didn't realize her. Dog's shed still had the power cord running, now wet, partially buried in mud, and connected to an indoor plug. That morning, the breaker tripped. The septic pump failed, and 6 homes woke up to something no scented candle could hide. You've never heard a neighborhood gag in unison until you've stood at the center of one. Overflow, bubbles in the lawn, showers that wouldn't drain. The county came down hard. Second violation. This time, environmental impact confirmed. They threatened to fine the HOA, not just Karen. That's when the board turned on her. They demanded she step down. She refused. So, they voted. She lost. The woman who once fined a man for leaving his trash bins out 20 minutes past pickup was now the one blamed for actual biological contamination. She called it a witch hunt, claimed she was the victim, threatened to sue. But her voice didn't carry anymore. Not after the reports. Not after the footage. Not after the smell. And not after I stepped forward at the community forum and laid it all out. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just read the timeline, the plug-ins, the power drops, the camera footage, the inspector's findings, the consequences. By the time I finished, you could hear the lake wind pushing through the trees. No applause, just understanding. She packed up 2 weeks later, said she was downsizing. Her house sold in silence. I walked past her on the final morning. She didn't look at me, but her dog did. Even he looked relieved. Karen's U-Haul rattled away like the end of an episode nobody wanted to watch again. Her driveway sat empty, save for a few broken flower pots near the edge of the curb, the last remnants of a woman who once believed she could control every corner of our lives. But you don't just walk away from a mess like that without someone cleaning up behind you. And this time, it wouldn't be me. The HOA scrambled. With Karen gone, they had no one to hide behind, no one to steer the narrative. For years, she'd been the voice of compliance, slapping citations on holiday decorations, inspecting mailbox paint with a flashlight, and enforcing grass height rules like a drill sergeant. But beneath all that noise was a board too used to being passive. So when she left, their silence turned into chaos. A temporary chairperson was appointed. Mark, the ex-firefighter who'd stood up to her. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't political. He was tired of the nonsense, and that's why the neighborhood backed him. His first move wasn't to hold a meeting. It was to walk, street by street, house by house. He knocked on doors, listened, and took notes. Real ones. Not the performative, clipboard kind. And when he showed up at my porch, he didn't ask to talk. He asked to understand. "Can you walk me through the setup?" he asked, pointing to the conduit box near the septic control panel. I did. In detail. He didn't flinch at the technical parts. He didn't interrupt. He just asked questions when he didn't know something. And when I finished, he stood there for a long moment before saying, "We need to make sure this never happens again." He meant it. Within a week, he drafted a proposal. Any HOA member caught misusing shared or private infrastructure would be subject to direct board investigation, including referral to the county if utilities or health systems were involved. The vote passed unanimously, but that was just the surface. What I didn't see coming was what happened next. How Karen's exit cracked something open in our neighborhood that went far beyond sewage, wires, or extension cords. Because when someone, like her falls, people don't just breathe a sigh of relief. They start examining the chains they hadn't even noticed around their ankles. It started with Janet from Lot 17. She'd been fined twice under Karen's reign, once for parking her son's truck in her own driveway during a college visit, and again for having wind chimes that exceeded auditory limits. She pulled out her old violation letters at the next HOA open forum and read them out loud, word for word. Her voice shook, not with anger, but with something closer to shame, like she'd finally realized how deeply she'd been gaslit into believing she was the problem. Then came Aaron, the young vet from Lot 22. He'd installed a wheelchair ramp for his mom and was fined for unauthorized exterior modification. Karen had claimed it disrupted the aesthetic continuity of the block. He stood up at that same forum and calmly said, "I thought I was helping my mom. I thought I was doing something good, and I let myself feel guilty because someone with a clipboard told me it looked wrong. That room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. Mark didn't say a word for nearly 10 seconds. Then he spoke the simplest words I've ever heard from someone in a leadership seat. We were wrong. Just that. And that was when everything shifted." Though HOA stopped being a weapon, it started becoming a mirror. Mark began reviewing every unresolved complaint, every unresolved violation, every strange rule Karen had slipped in during her years of control. She had rewritten entire sections of the bylaws without a vote, hiding behind legalese and procedural jargon. It turned out Karen had even proposed, and passed, a clause giving herself discretionary power to impose fines up to $500 per incident if the violation presents an immediate risk to the integrity of community standards. That clause was eliminated by unanimous board vote. But this wasn't just about rewriting policy. It was about rebuilding something that Karen had systematically dismantled: trust. And ironically, it started with something as mundane as a Saturday workday. Mark put out a neighborhood-wide invite. No pressure, no guilt. Just an open call. "We're fixing the storm drains, trimming common path trees, and repainting the shared mailbox units. If you can help, come help. If you can't, we still hope to see you." Nearly 30 people showed up. I brought my toolbox. Janet brought lemonade. Aaron brought folding chairs for his mom. Even Mrs. Calder showed up with a radio and an old boombox from the 90s, and as we worked, something unspoken filled the air. Not just community, but relief. Like we were finally allowed to care about the neighborhood without fearing judgment. That's the thing about quiet power. It's not loud. It doesn't need to be. It moves like groundwater, unseen but unstoppable once it finds a path. Weeks passed. Seasons shifted. The lake turned from green to silver as fall came in. But one morning, something peculiar arrived. At my mailbox, a letter. No return address. Inside, a folded piece of stationery, handwritten. "You got what you wanted. Hope you're proud." No name, no signature. But I recognized the handwriting. Karen's. I held the paper for a long time before setting it down. Not because I was angry, not because I felt victorious, but because it proved one thing. She still didn't get it. I never wanted power. I wanted peace, and she mistook my patience for weakness. That's the flaw in people like her. They assume the quiet ones won't push back. But when we do, we don't do it for applause. We do it to protect what matters. A week after that letter, the county mailed me a certificate of community recognition, something Mark had quietly nominated me for, citing civic vigilance and infrastructure preservation. It was a small plaque, just metal and wood, but it felt like a full circle. Karen had once threatened to sue me for reporting her behavior, said I was defaming a public servant. But in the end, the only thing I exposed was her assumption that rules didn't apply to her. She'd plugged into a sewage pump and thought it was free energy. What she got was the slow, irreversible current of accountability. And here's the truth no HOA Karen ever wants to hear. Power isn't about rules, it's about responsibility. Break that, and no title saves you. There's a strange kind of quiet that comes after a long war. Not the silence of defeat or even victory, but the calm that creeps in once no one is looking over their shoulder anymore. 3 months passed. The cables were gone. Karen's U-Haul had vanished into memory, and for the first time in years, the lakefront didn't feel like a minefield. It felt like home, the real kind. Not just where your mail comes, but where your chest loosens every time you pull into the driveway. Where the fence isn't just a line in the ground. It's a promise that what's yours is safe. It wasn't fast. It wasn't clean, but it was over. And like most real things, the ending wasn't marked by some grand announcement. It was marked by something quieter. A little boy on a scooter. His name was Mason. He lived 3 houses down, barely tall, enough to see over the handlebars. Karen used to bark at him if he got too close to her flower beds. She once threatened to report his parents because his training wheels scratched the sidewalk chalk. Now, he rolled through the cul-de-sac every afternoon, weaving figure eights like the asphalt had forgiven him, and every time I saw him I thought the same thing. That's how you know healing's working, when the smallest people stop being afraid. The neighborhood didn't erase what happened. That would have been a mistake. It remembered the way a body remembers a deep cut, but it also restructured itself, cellular level by cellular level, to never let it happen again. Mark stayed on as HOA chair, not because he wanted power, but because people finally understood what it meant to have someone with a spine who didn't need to flex it. His motto was simple: serve, don't rule. And under his guidance, things got real. The board hosted quarterly transparency meetings. Every violation had to be backed by photographic proof. Every fine had a grace period and an appeals process. And every resident got access to the bylaws, printed, plain English, and mailed directly to their door. But the biggest change wasn't in policy, it was in how people treated each other. Aaron, the young vet with the wheelchair ramp, he started a volunteer maintenance squad. Just 3 people at first, him, Janet from Lot 17, and the teenager who used to mow lawns. But soon, it grew. They'd fix sagging porch lights, help older folks with gutters, and do monthly walkthroughs to catch issues before citations ever became necessary, not to police, to prevent. And that shift, that core recalibration, was the legacy Karen could never kill. Because the truth is, her reign hadn't just poisoned the rules. It had taught people to look at each other like threats. You could feel it when you walked past someone and their eyes darted away. You could feel it in the brittle smiles, the too quick waves, the doors that shut a little too fast when you were 10 steps away. But now, slowly, that fear was bleeding out of us. One Thursday, around dusk, Janet stopped by with a mason jar of homemade apple butter. No reason, no agenda. Just a smile and a thank you for fixing the broken panel on the community bulletin board. I didn't even remember doing it. That's how normal helping each other had become. And in all of it, in the unspoken rituals we were rebuilding, there was a quiet, undeniable truth. Karen's shadow was gone, but the light she'd blocked had always been there, waiting. As for the outlet, it stayed. Not because it needed to, but because I wanted the reminder. I sealed off the line to the sewage pump, rerouted it through the insulated sub-panel like it always should have been, and installed a lockable weatherproof cover over the main receptacle. The irony? Now it actually was safe for someone to plug in, if they had permission. It stood there on the side of the house like a war monument made of PVC and tempered steel. People asked about it sometimes. I always told the same story. How a single woman with too much power and not enough wisdom thought she could cheat the system. How her arrogance led her to plug a hot cord into a line she didn't understand. How the ground didn't shake, the skies didn't thunder. But her downfall came anyway, slow, quiet, inevitable. Not because someone screamed, but because someone noticed. That story spread, not like gossip, like folklore. New residents would ask, "Is this the neighborhood with the sewage outlet thing?" And people would nod, smile, maybe even laugh. But underneath it was a shared knowing, a silent pact. Never again. Because every neighborhood has its tipping point. And ours had come not from a scandal, but from a slow burn, a years-long erosion of dignity, finally snapped by a single, absurd, undeniable act of entitlement. Karen hadn't just plugged into an outlet. She'd plugged into our patience, and she overloaded it. The county eventually reviewed the HOA's history after receiving multiple letters, not from me, but from residents who came forward after the incident. They didn't pursue criminal charges, but they did issue a formal audit recommendation. Turns out Karen had diverted HOA funds toward a beautification campaign, which, translated, meant overpriced flower beds installed exclusively in front of her house and hand-picked properties owned by her friends. The vendors had all been connected to the same two landscaping firms, both run by the same family. A distant cousin of hers, no one got arrested, no cuffs. But the reputation damage stuck. The new board froze all landscaping contracts. They renegotiated every supplier deal from scratch and posted all vendor invoices online. Mark called it the sunlight policy. I called it what it was, justice. Not the courtroom kind, the neighborly kind. The kind that says, "We see what you did, and you don't get to do it again." Karen never came back. Rumors said she moved to a retirement village in Arizona. Someone saw her once at a flea market, arguing over the price of a ceramic flamingo. Fitting, really. She'd been reduced to noise, background static, a lesson in how not to lead, but her absence created something she never could have, a neighborhood that no longer needed her to define its boundaries. Because here's what I learned. Real community doesn't come from rules. It comes from rituals, from showing up without being asked, from waiting just a little longer than you need to, from fixing the thing even if it's not yours, from remembering your neighbor's dog's name even if you forget theirs. And most of all, from not mistaking silence for surrender. People like Karen count on silence. They bet on your politeness, your desire to keep the peace, your fear of causing trouble. But quiet is not the same as weak. It's pressure, waiting. It's a tide swelling. And when it turns, it doesn't scream. It simply doesn't stop. So when people ask how I dealt with her, how I took down the woman who thought HOA law was her personal crown, I tell them, I didn't take her down. She tripped on her own cord. All I did was not move the outlet. Now, years later, when I sit on the porch and listen to the lake, when I see Mason carving bike trails across the driveway without a care in the world, I don't think about sewage. Think about light, about how good it feels to live in a place that finally let it in, and about how the smallest plug, the pettiest theft, the quietest injustice can set off a change no rule book can predict, because quiet power isn't just resistance, it's restoration. And here, in this little lakeside patch of grass and gravel, we finally restored what mattered most, each other. She thought she could drain us, but in the end, she just flushed herself out.